Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And we want to welcome each one of you to this webinar today. My name is Michael Myra. I work with the East Africa Philanthropy Network. We want to welcome each one of you to this learning session that is going to start shortly. You give us a few minutes as we finalize admitting all the others who are on waiting. We will begin in a short while. So we want to start by, once again, welcoming each one of you to this learning event today. As we begin, we want to quickly bring to your attention a few housekeeping rules. We kindly request that each one of you has your microphone turned off until when you're given the opportunity to speak. Secondly, we want to request that already I can see a number of you have started to introduce yourselves. Kindly use the chat to introduce yourselves and your organization and where you are joining us from. And we also want to encourage you to use the chat to ask any questions that you may have as the webinar continues. And finally, I want to take this opportunity once again to welcome each one of you and our facilitators today who will walk us through the process of community foundations and the learnings that we hope to appropriate cross-border from various countries, but also from various organizations that will go a long way to build our capacity to engage at the community foundations. At this point, I want to take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Evans Okenye, the CEO at East Africa Philanthropy Network, who will take us through the introductory part, setting the background and giving us an opportunity to see where we are coming from and where we are going with this land. Evans, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mike. I had quite some engagements with some of you this morning, and it's just amazing how, you know, the world is. I was talking to a colleague in this call from Malawi, and it's been so hot in Malawi. And this morning they saw the rain and they're so excited about it. In Nairobi, it's been a bad weather, and today at least we can see some sun. Colleagues from Dar es Salaam, things were so hot, and so it's such a lovely opportunity that we have as practitioners within the community philanthropy space to once again see how we can strengthen and make better the engagements that we are having in our individual responsibilities as organizations, as individuals, in championing development at community level. I'm always very excited when talking about community philanthropy because I am a product of communities. And so it is so exciting to be in this call. I want to start just briefly by sharing with us a quote from one of the people that I respect so much, that is Richard Canuel, who says that the spirit of community will be revived as we succeed in devising ways to re-involve people in solving the perplexing problems they see about them, not just in walking and talking about them, solve them. And so this morning we have a big opportunity to see how we can not just talk about the problems that we have at the community level, but also come up with practical, actionable ways in which we can solve them. And we have a very interesting conversation this morning, and our deliberations will not really be about what we need to do, but rather what other people are already doing and how these complexities are already being solved at community level. So this is basically a learning and knowledge exchange Africa Philanthropy Network with our membership, with the other actors serving communities. And over the last few years, we've had numerous engagements around, say, for example, participatory grant making, how we can unlock local resources for local development challenges, lessons from the field, how we can learn from practitioners. And all these learnings have focused on assets, have focused on the wealth that we have within communities. And this brings to the light the asset orientation, that orientation to development, to the extent in which it is sufficient to allow communities on their own to unlock their local community assets, of course, for their own development. And these conversations basically have pointed out to around three things that we want to talk about these assets. These assets could be in terms of skills, they could be in terms of knowledge, they could be in terms of networks, they could be in terms of money. And when we pull all this together, they build what we call a community of power and voice. That is one thing that has come out in these conversations. The other thing that has come out is that when people bring these resources together, when they feel involved and engaged in that development process, then they start to feel like they are co-investors with a stake in their own development. And this brings out that the fact that they then begin to care more about the outcome. They then begin to care more about the action that they need to make so that they can advance and protect their interest in that development initiative because they feel they have contributed their resources in that process. The third thing that came out in all these conversations that we have had, that these local resources, the local wealth that we are talking about, have really helped to create a horizontal form of accountability to the community and not just to the donors, which have brought out trust, and transparency. So we are looking at the trust and transparency agenda, we are looking at the ownership agenda, and we are looking at the availability of resources that we have within these communities. What does this tell us? It's therefore important for us to strengthen the engagements that we are having as community philanthropy practitioners, whether we are here, and I'm glad looking at the list that we are having of participants, bulk of us are community foundations. It is important for us to strengthen the engagements that we are having, to strengthen the learning and knowledge sharing that we want to advance today and that we have advanced over the last many months within the year 2022, to build alliances and of course work towards a favorable environment that will enable us to build a stronger, more impactful philanthropy taking place in communities. And it is on this background that the East Africa Philanthropy Network came up with this idea to build a platform, the platform under which we have been convening over the last many months, to share cross-border experience on community philanthropy across the East Africa region and beyond, like we're about to see today, to strengthen networks of community foundations within the East Africa region. We want to see how we can connect you working in communities, you know, in Kenya, within the counties in Kenya, in Tanzania, within the districts in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Rwanda, so that we can have a stronger network of community foundations championing sustainable development within this region. We want to see through these engagements how we can create a collaborative community foundations platform that is able to engage locally within the respective regions of the countries we serve, and of course at the regional level. And this ultimately should be able to enable us develop practical tools that we can then use to strengthen the community foundations that we are convening together as they respond to the needs of communities. And so today we have a huge opportunity, and I am so glad that we are practically walking the talk. We want to see what is happening in the southern part of this continent, Tanzania downwards to South Africa. We want to see what the practitioners, what the support ecosystem is doing in strengthening community foundations to champion the philanthropy at the community level. And so we are joined today by Civio Institute, a very close partner of VAPN, working around the clock over the last many years since the establishment a few years ago in strengthening community philanthropy and conversations around it by providing knowledge, engaging stakeholders, working towards a favorable legal policy infrastructure for the growth of philanthropy across the continent. And of course, we have got SGS Consulting, a pioneer on matters community philanthropy, generating knowledge, coming up with practical tools that can help us strengthen these conversations that we are having. And of course, we have with us a network that is really a role model globally, the network of community foundations in Tanzania, the Tanzania network of community foundations, that will then give us practical aspects on these conversations we are having. How have they managed to embed the conversations around wealth, around resources, around SDGs, into the communities that they serve within their member networks, within serving community foundations. So without speaking too much, I want to leave it there and invite my colleague, Mike O'Meara, to continue with the conversation and bring on board the other practitioners that we put together for you today to strengthen your knowledge and learning around this conversation we are having. And so I want to take this early opportunity to welcome you and of course wish us the very best in the learning. And it's my hope and our hope as EAPN that by the end of the day, your knowledge, your expertise around matters community philanthropy as a community foundation will not remain the same. Thank you so much and welcome, Mike, and I wish us the best in the deliberations.
Thank you very much, Evans, for that background setting that you've done for us. I want to just take a little bit back and welcome our facilitators today. As Evans mentioned, we have 3 major institutions, but ideally 3 practitioners, experts in various aspects of community foundations, who will walk with us today in this learning journey of 1-2 hours, in which we will be able to unravel some of the major areas that we have prepared for you. So allow me to welcome Dr. Tendai Mrisa, who is a long-standing practitioner from Civil Institute. Daktari, karibu.
Thank you very much.
We will teach you a bit of Swahili now.
Yes, please.
Karibu. And secondly, too, we'll be joined by Sean Samuels from SGS Consulting in South Africa. Equally a long-standing practitioner in community philanthropy and management and issues that all run through the founding, the management, and the running of community foundations. And finally, we will be joined by Mr. Mwadhini Myanza, who is the coordinator of Tanzania Community Foundations Network, who will walk us through again part of the work they have been doing over the last so many years. And to set us off in this journey, Dr. Tendai, we want to welcome you to take us through this process, looking at the various aspects, particularly, as we're saying, from a lab experience of nurturing community giving and giving us the opportunity to see, particularly some of the things that the Institute has been pushing in terms of participation of the various partners, but particularly the participation of the citizens in their own processes. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. I know time zones are different, but I believe it's still morning wherever you are. I hope you can see my slides.
Yeah, you are yet to open them.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I'm yet to open them. Okay, yes.
At least what we are seeing on this side
is my computer.
Yes.
Okay, all right, no. Oh. Stop share. Stop share. Okay. I may have to do this without sharing. I am technologically challenged already, but let's see. I thought I'd minimize them. Okay,
right.
I may do without sharing. Let me just try one more time. Okay, let's desktop. Desktop now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There you are. Now we can see it, Dr.
Okay, good. All right. So let's so we'll now looking for slideshow. Okay. All right. So I think before I begin, just to say that the conversations that we're having on community philanthropy should be seen as connected to the broader conversations around pathways of development. How, for some of us, it's the imagination or thinking through what it will take to get Africa out of the rut of poverty. That's very important for us. And we see agency, communities coming together, rallying around certain solutions and innovations as a critical component of that process, because we think that is what will take us forward as a people. At the moment, our challenge is the fact that we have not yet come to a place whereby we have an understanding of the different pathways. So Africa has been an experimenting site. There's been so many experiments carried out on us as African people around development aid, the NGO experience, or governments, social enterprises, etc. But in it, what we do is we continuously see an erosion of what communities can do. We are not bringing that to the center of the discussions around the pathways of growth, the pathways of inclusive development. We are in a rush to import many things, and in the process, we reduce our people to dependence. And it has been this dependency cycle since independence that has sort of affected frameworks like Ujamaa that we had in Tanzania, etc. Frameworks to do with our own agency, our own activities to do stuff. So just as a recap, and I'm glad that Evans took us through the reimagining of what we mean when we're talking about asset-based approach. So in a nutshell, when we're talking about asset-based approaches, we're really talking about a process that begins from a focus on the strength of, okay, we have a mic that is just come on and displaying music. Anyway, it's done. Thanks. So we have an asset-based approach to horizontal philanthropy. So this is just a recap for colleagues who may not have who may need refreshing on this. So we're saying that the discussion that we're going to be having this morning, it starts off from a focus on the strengths of a particular community. So we need to have an understanding that each and every community where people are, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there's something that is going on. There's some form of strength. There's some form of assets in there. Then from that aspect of thinking through the strengths of a community, we recognize these strengths, we recognize their gifts, we recognize their talents and resources of individuals within the community. So we do a lot of mapping around to say, what can you do? So you go into a community, realize, oh, so-and-so used to be a painter in Nairobi. So-and-so used to be a carpenter in Nakuru. So-and-so used to do this. Then we begin to say, but why then are we not using these assets, these people, to help build the school over there? Because other members of the community maybe can come up and say, we can mold bricks. Others can say, we can fetch water, etc. So those are the things we're talking about, the strengths and gifts and talents that are within a community. Then we begin to identify unique assets, not necessarily unique, but assets that are within the community. These are normally physical, social, natural, relational, and financial. I'll talk a bit about the social assets within a community. Many of our communities in Africa today have more than 100 years history. So the levels of trust, which is an important tie in a community, the levels of trust normally in rural communities are always high because people know each other. They have helped bury each other's loved ones. They have helped celebrate birthdays together. They have helped celebrate marriages together. So these are people who know each other. And in some instances, you may find that they share certain common religious beliefs or traditional beliefs. So it's easier to identify that as an asset, to say, if you're going to start on an initiative, you are going to build upon what already exists in that community. So that's the social. Physical, natural, could be they are close to a dam, they are close to a forest, they are close to something unique that has got commercial value, or they are close to something that is needed by others. So all these things we need to map and amplify in the community, because half the time you'll be surprised when you talk to members of a community, they may start off by saying, oh, we're generally poor people, we generally don't have much. But when you begin to explore what is in that community, the oral traditions, what they used to do, etc., you'll be surprised when you're actually doing this as a study. You'll be surprised by how many pages you'll fill around the assets that they have. So a community, an asset-based approach to horizontal philanthropy is then an attempt to say, how do we build upon and release the capacity which is in communities to contribute towards driving their own development by starting with what already exists. So these are the issues we're grappling with as we're talking about philanthropy, and especially in its community form. So I just thought to use this as a recap. But I want to go into the learning that we were invited to sort of share. We've just completed a study in Zimbabwe on community philanthropy, what we're calling community forms of philanthropy. And these community forms of philanthropy, we identified close to 38 organizations that look like community philanthropy organizations. Rarely do they use the term community in Zimbabwe. That's not a term that we use. So we use terms like giving, we use terms like solidarity, we use terms like sharing, or women's groups, etc. But rarely do you find that. But it was based on our normative framework to say, as we're going into the field, we're looking for organizations that do these three things, either combine or they have one of them. Either they combine membership, that the organization is based on membership. That's number one. Number two, the organization receives funding in terms of either finances, human capital, and others. A significant part, at least 25 to 30%, comes from within the community, or also comes from the members of this community, but who are now maybe in the city or in the diaspora. So whenever we saw an organization that was mobilizing resources from what we called the within, rather than looking outside, we call that a community philanthropy organization. But in the process, as we're carrying out this study, initially it was just a mapping. There's a handbook that is on our website with all the community organizations that we mapped, etc., what they do, etc. That was the precursor to the book, because the book is a bit more detailed. We're now trying to give you the meat around the challenges they're facing. It's case study based. We carry out case studies of these 24 community foundations, and we're mostly focusing around the issues that they deal with, and also how they are established and how they mobilize resources and some of the challenges we face. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're just going to focus on challenges and then talk about some of the innovations we've come to sort of unleash based on these challenges. So the first one is governance structures. These are mostly organic entities. They come from the ground up, and they are mostly led by what you may call organic community leaders. And structures take a secondary role. Structures are not the first thing that you are going to see in these organizations. They will come in as part and parcel of a formalization process. And there's always tension between what you are seeing as founders and what they then establish maybe as what we may call a secretariat. There is no clear boundaries between the role of the board and the role of the entity that they establish, based on the organic energies that when they started, they never felt like they were going to be stopped to say, oh, you're just the board, you meet once or twice a year, then you let the secretariat do your work. But they are actively engaged in the process. And the mistake we see is these actively engaged members, all of them becoming board members. So others say it's good, but we actually see it as a challenge, because it's the passion behind the establishment of these foundations that now resides at the board level, but you don't see it maybe at the secretariat level. That's number one. Then number two, the issue to do with organizational processes. Like I said, it's one thing to have the conflation, but it's also number two to really say there is, in many instances, there is no template that exists to say this is how a community organization, a community philanthropy organization that mobilizes resources from within and also from outside actually sort of has to organize itself. So you may find that given the intrusion maybe or the intervention of donors or NGOs that want to work with this, the organization eventually ends up looking more outward, servicing the needs of the donors and not the community itself in terms of reporting, in terms of agenda, in terms of programs. That becomes a challenge. Then also another challenge is to say, how are they able to mobilize assets from within? One of the biggest assets we saw in Zimbabwe from within, which has not been capitalized upon, is the sons and daughters from each and every community that are now in the diaspora. Zimbabwe has gone through roughly a decade or so of a crisis, and that crisis has been associated with outward migration. So Zimbabwe has got sons and daughters all over the world, and some of them are doing very well, but you'll find that communities are yet to tap into that resource. So you'll hear that, oh, there's so-and-so son who's based in Sydney, Australia, or based in New Zealand, or based in Nairobi, or based in London. But all we see about so-and-so son is how he has helped to expand their village home. He has not expanded yet to go into sort of sorting out the clinic in the village or sorting out the bridge in the village, because the organization that is supposed to be mobilizing this does not yet have the wherewithal or the tools around mobilizing, not just from one person, but from a number of them, and creating a network and also creating a reporting structure that reports effectively to their satisfaction. Because again, there are issues to do with transparency around resources, etc. Then The third challenge, no, sorry, the fourth challenge is around amplifying the work of the organization. How do we make sure that this organization working in a community like Nakuru or in a rural area around Nakuru, but in Zimbabwe, in a place like Shurugwi or Chivi, is actually doing work that can be picked up by others and people can learn from it, but also people can be interested in supporting it. So many of the organizations we studied do not have websites. When they have a social media page, is underutilized. The posts are so erratic. You may see 2 posts in a year or never. So they are yet to take advantage of existing technological platforms to amplify the work that they are doing so that they can attract more resources. And there's also limited collaboration. This could be different with you colleagues in East Africa. In Southern Africa, especially in Zimbabwe in particular, there's yet to be an infrastructure organization that helps groups like this just to consider best practice and also to consider opportunities of collaboration. So related to the issue of collaboration is also this silo-based approaches. But silo, even in the sense of an organization working in a community, but not even being able to map and to get into a place whereby it can coordinate its work with other organizations, being able to work maybe with other NGOs that are active in the area, with other schools, other churches to come up. So you find that we have all these entities, but they are working as isolated pillars and they are not creating the connections with their work. So it's a huge issue because development by its very nature requires synergy for it to take off. So that's one of the issues that we sort of thought. So I can just browse through some of the organizations that we saw in terms of the names they'll give themselves. Others will call themselves just a local association or a club. They have elected officials, they have a constitution in place, and they do a wide-ranging set of activities. Some of them are engaged in burial societies, women's clubs, etc. Then we have community-based organizations, CBOs. They also combine elected and appointed officials. And some of them, the logic of how they were started is that it was actually maybe through the logic of an NGO that was thinking of a project exit out of the community. So it establishes a community-based organ, giving it the resources. Then community members have to think entrepreneurially around how to sort of mobilize assets from the community so that they can keep the work going. Then we have community share ownership trusts. These are, I think they are particularly unique to Zimbabwe. They were established by an edict of the law. Zimbabwe, for many of you, you may know, is a country endowed with minerals, gold, diamonds, platinum, etc. But these minerals are being mined in communities. So you have these islands of plenty in seas of poverty. So government, especially under the previous president, came up with what they call the community share ownership trust scheme. So the idea here was to say that every mining company has to get into a partnership with a community and they establish a community share ownership trust. And they should cede to that community 5% of the shareholding of the mine. Only one mine did that. It's called Blanket Mine in Gwanda. It actually issued shares to the community. Others preferred just giving dividends. So the reason why we mention this is these are not small dividends. They are community share ownership trusts that manage on a good year, in a good year, maybe $4 million United States dollars, and some even slightly more. So this went on for a while under Mugabe, but when there was a change of government, because Mugabe had not passed it into law, he had just passed it as an executive instruction. So many mining companies have reneged on that condition, but community share ownership trusts still exists. These were interesting in the sense that they combine traditional authority, they combine community leaders, and they've been instrumental in certain community projects, especially around infrastructure, the building of clinics, the building of bridges, the building of roads, etc. It went on for a couple of years, but we have seen since the new regime came in 2017, there's been a slowdown. The best practice for this is the mine we saw. It's a Canadian-owned mine that is in Gwanda. It's called Blanket Mine. It has done well because it has continued. It has not reneged on its partnership with the community. Every year, the community gets a dividend, and they also own shares there. Governance structures, all 24 entities that we studied, they had what looks like boards, but the capacity of these boards varied. So there's weak governance processes, this separation of finances between what the board can do and what the secretariat can do. And also some of the boards do not have independence in decision making. We saw this mostly in the community share ownership trust, that yes, it's a community share ownership trust that has received funding from the mining company. But we saw that the mining company was even following up on those resources, trying to intervene and direct what communities should do with those resources. Then also, there are also issues to do with staffing, just creating an effectively an effective secretariat needs a budget, you need skills, etc. And some of these skills, maybe they may not want to reside where the community share ownership trust or the community philanthropy organization is best. So you may find that they fail to attract capable resources. But also another thing that we have to make very clear is that there is no specific training for community philanthropy organizations yet. So people are going in there with different skill sets that they have to adapt in the management of these very nimble and fluid organizations. And in the process, they may actually sort of corrupt the objective of that organization, because some will try to make it look like an NGO, some will try to make it look like a government department, some will try to make it look like a social enterprise. All those are because there's really we do not have, as practitioners, we do not yet have a science around how to establish this and what kind of skills we need. We know we can attract generic skills, but especially at leadership level, where you're thinking of strategy, you're thinking of partnerships, we need a certain kind of thinking that if we corrupt that, the entire organization is also corrupted. So there's also the issue of lack of diverse and effective fundraising techniques. Community share ownership trusts have remained in the rut of dependency upon the mining company. So they are waiting for that check that comes once a year. Then community philanthropy organizations, some of them struggle because they can only mobilize. One of them that we saw, they mobilize, I think, $1 from each member. They have like 2,500 members, but that is not enough. So maybe they have to mobilize that every month. But again, the huge gap we saw, they do not mobilize from people with an association with that community, but no longer residing in the community. These could be people who are now in the cities, Bulawayo to the south, Harare to the north, or globally in the diaspora. But we're yet to see an organization that is energetically seeking resources from the diaspora and mobilizing them, and also making sure that they are accountable to the diaspora in that way. Then this issue, like I said, CSOTs relied on the 10% profit that was pledged by qualifying businesses. So and also fundraising skills. That's a major issue. How do we make sure that we also, because for us, as we conducted this, the research for the book, we explained to those who we were talking to say, we are not just another research organization. We are carrying out this research so that we can come up with appropriate responses to the challenges that you are facing. So the work that we did was not just to go there and extract information from the community. So communication, I've already mentioned, there's very little leveraging of technology, limited collaboration. Now, let me talk about what is our approach to this. We've come up, in fact, we came up with the Philanthropy Lab approach prior to us going into the community. So the Philanthropy Lab is a platform that sits on our website, seveoinstitute.org. Then you'll see the Philanthropy Lab. It seeks to allow for the ease of access to information and resources that helps strengthen community giving and also community philanthropy. So here what we're trying to do is to say, if you're in a community foundation and you want to hold a board meeting, you come to the Philanthropy Lab. You're going to get all the steps of how to host a board meeting. If you want to have a constitution for your club, your association, you can click and you can get a template. If you want to have a facilitation guideline, to say you want to have a community meeting, you come to the lab, you get detailed notes on how to do this. And going into 2023, we're going to be putting podcasts on the website so that people can just go on this podcast, watch at their leisure, and learn what it is to say, to have a deliberation with the community. It's very important. to say, how do you deliberate with the community? How do you facilitate an exchange between the board and the secretariat? How do you facilitate the development of a community-led strategy? How do you facilitate fundraising? These are tools that are embedded on our community philanthropy lab. As you see here, the lab contains information and resources that are focused on 5 areas. Number 1, how to register as a legal entity, because we find that many entities struggle with formalization and compliance. Governance processes, setting up an effective board, but also if you're the board chair or the board secretary, how to run a board. Operations, day-to-day running of initiatives or projects within that community foundation, and also visibility and communications, helping them tell their story. We think it's very important that organizations that are working at the community level are able to tell their own story, not necessarily waiting for the researchers to tell them the story, to tell their story. Because half the time we learn about these organizations through academic papers, and these are cleaned up papers. We want the story in its raw form with their voices, because the idea really about the shift we're seeing is to say we need communities to have their voice. So we want them to be visible, to be able to communicate. And also we have set up a collaboration platform where they can collaborate with amongst each other. We were fortunate enough that we were able to take some colleagues from Zimbabwe to be part of the APN in Entebbe. The idea is to also help facilitate conversations amongst community philanthropy organizations that are based in Zimbabwe, that they begin to cross-fertilize and exchange ideas on how to do their business. Then we also have got what we call an IT support suite. So we've got all these free access tools around financial management, database management. Is becoming very important if you are doing individual fundraising, to have a very good database management system so that we can help them. We can set that data up for them so that they can also communicate easily with those who would be willing to partner with them. So that's, in a nutshell, is what we're doing. So we are hoping that through our work and also the increased visibilization, when we increase visibility of the assets that are within the communities, we may begin to see communities looking a bit more inward than out in terms of tapping community assets, and also understanding the different value chain opportunities around their assets. So we're talking to communities that are in mango growing regions. We're talking to communities that are in potentially other horticulture activities, to begin to say there are ways in which you can mobilize what you have, but also rather than selling your things in their raw form or in their primary form, try to make sure that you are part and parcel of encouraging value addition so that you can have bigger returns to your activities. So that we can, the idea is so that to make them able to leverage what you may call leverage when they're the negotiation. So they have a better sort of sitting position than coming as beggars or people who are dependent on outside sources, but they come as empowered communities. Because one of the ideas around community philanthropy is really to see the achievement or the realization of the concept of empowered and resilient communities. I'll end here, then we can come back to discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. You have elucidated a number of learnings that you've gotten from this recent research, and a number of things stand out even as we go through what you've just shared, as we reflect upon some of the things that have come through. Indeed, the settings in Zimbabwe may be slightly different from the settings in the other countries within the region and even in the East African region, but the essentials of community foundations remain right there. I want to pause here and encourage participants to put in their questions on the chat as you prepare your questions to Dr. I want to take this opportunity then to move on and welcome Sean Samuels from SGS Consulting to also take us through particularly some of the challenges that you mentioned in this presentation, the challenge around funding and funding realities of the community foundations. How do community foundations survive in these very difficult conditions, particularly given all the things that have happened from the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the shift in geopolitics that has led to a lot of resources not coming to the ground. What do we do in resource-constrained environments? Sean Samuels, please welcome.
Hi, good morning to you all. Thank you for the invitation to be here, and thanks to Dr. Tendai for that overview and input. I think it was extremely valuable. I just need to say that I've been having some with access to internet, so I'm hoping that this connection will be stable. And if you may allow me to share a presentation that I'd like to make, if that's okay. Okay. Can we see that?
Yes, Sean, it's coming on. Right. We can see.
Okay. So thank you very much. Is it coming on? Cool. Just say, my name is Sean Samuels, consulting based here in Johannesburg and nations in Southern Africa. How we, in a sense, build the infrastructure, which is community foundation support organizations that in turn must support community foundations in their respective countries. Our role and our approach is about organizational development, institution building. So we spend a lot of time in the field at the grassroots level, building the organizations. You know, some of the issues that Tendai has mentioned around governance and strategic planning and the actual sort of skills and organizational functioning is what we actually do. So this kind of work we're in for the long haul. We have learned through our experience that able to build community foundations. We also work with organizations in our community foundation like so if they sort of meet certain criteria around the community some of the challenges that relate to community foundations themselves as a concept. So I want to start by sort of saying, let's talk about community foundations in the first instance. Then there are quite a few crossroads that I think will be important
Hello, Sean.
for me to,
Allow me
in a
to
sense.
interrupt you. Hello, Sean. Sean, please allow me to interrupt you a little bit. The internet seems to be a little bit challenging. Sorry, as he mentioned here. Yeah. Sean, are you back? We lost you.
I'm saying that if he can share the slides, because it seems the internet connection is a bit poor wherever he is, then you can moderate the slides later on when there is a good internet connection.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Okay, great.
Hi, sorry, Mike. I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. If you can switch off your video and then speak,
Let me
get you better.
I'll do that.
Right.
Okay, cool. Shall do that. Thank you. Let me go back to share. Okay, so you can see that, Mike? Sorry, I have to check
is yet to
because
come
I'm not sure
fully
about my
on.
network. Okay.
Again,
You can hear me?
okay. Yes, yes, we
Okay.
can hear you. Yeah. Okay. Appears that the audio as well, we cannot hear you. As we sort out, allow me to welcome Mr. Mwadini, who would take us through the work that foundations are doing on the ground, particularly linking some of these challenges that have come through from responding to development challenges, and particularly linking them up to the various SDGs as we put together our response, linking them up with these ideals of development within the communities. Dr. Mwadini, Mr. Mwadini, sorry, as you come on, I would like you to help us just put into focus some of these issues that have come through, and as we respond to our demand for growth and development, but as we put them together through the 17 SDGs. Karibu Mwadini.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mikey, and greetings to everybody who is in the room. My name is Mwadini. Do you hear me, my colleagues?
We can hear you, Daktari. We can hear you, Mr. Mwadini. Karibu.
Asante sana. So my first part is to introduce myself, that I'm working with the Tanzania Community Foundation Network. And my purpose here is to share what is happening in Tanzania regarding the Tanzania Community Foundation interventions. And I'll try to share my ideas through the slides, which I'm trying to organize here. Hello? Hello, hello?
Yes. Yes. Please proceed.
Let me try to share.
We can hear you. Yes.
My slide, which I did enter. Do you see my slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. The foundation successful and challenges which sustainable development goes to community foundations. And probably the first thing is to know about the Tanzania Community Foundation Network. This is a network which was established in 2016 as a result of combining the efforts of 4 community foundations of Morogoro, Arusha, Kinondoni, and Mwanza. I would like first to say thanks to World Bank and the Global Fund for Community Foundation, the South Africa Trust Wings, and the United Republic of Tanzania to back up these initiatives at the beginning. Its formation was a result of a declaration which came from about 500 community participants in Morogoro, Arusha, Kinondoni, Dar es Salaam, and Mwanza to declare the establishment of the formal community foundations in the said areas. And this declaration was in 2008, which came about a great success to enable the establishment of the Tanzania Community Foundation in 2016, with the purpose, of course, to establish a network which will try to combine efforts aimed to improve the quality of citizens in the said areas. And by that time, we agreed that we concentrate in improve the quality education, business knowledge, and as well as climate change, agribusiness, and the knowledge on efficiency improved stoves. So before proceeding to the introduction, this network is actually a legally registered entity under the trustee incorporation, but also our individualized at the operational level. The presentation that the need here is to demonstrate the contribution made by Tanzania Community Foundation in that aspect. And I would like to refer two benchmarks. The first one happened in 2013 when we conducted the needs assessment study to our operational areas. And the second big event is this year, 2022, which we received a big effort from SGS to try to conduct a research, which will also give us inner and the outlets of what we have done since the establishment of Tanzania Community Foundation in relation to SDGs implementation in our areas. So I'll try to share the activities which was conducted, of course, but to also give you highlights on the impact of our intervention. And I would like, starting from the beginning, to say that my concentration will rely on SDG number 1, which is poverty, SDG number 2, which is hunger, of course, zero hunger, SDG number 4, which is quality education, gender, that means SDG number 5, climate change, 17, and partnership. Those are the areas which I try to share what has happened. But before proceeding, let me also share something about the contextual background and the Tanzania commitment to SDGs. To see that we are also doing something which is backed by the Tanzanian government. So Tanzania, you know, that it is in East Africa, and our estimation is approximately 34% of Tanzania live in poverty. And that is the area which community foundations play a very big role. Its economy is also comprising of various sectors which contribute to development, but largely dependent on agriculture. So majority of what we are talking about are informal people, informal sector. Much of the country's development successes, of course, is based on its diversity, on natural resources, socio-political stability, and the rapidly growing tourism. Of course, we are recognizing what is happening in our community foundation network. And also, I would like to share something about the communities and reflections, that we have identified some groups which have identified their successes, just to show that they are representing also other activities which are happening in other areas. And here, I would also like to share some social characteristics of the beneficiaries, which I will talk about. But let me say, the first thing is, what we are talking here is majority of our beneficiaries are young and females. And because of the youth face high level of unemployment, we are trying also to link this challenge with the community foundations. But also, community foundations invest in youth and women, and we are trying also to see how better we can empower their initiatives and come up with the
Mzee Mwadhini, we seem to have lost your voice. Mwadhini, can you hear me? Mwadhini?
Mwadhini, it seems we've lost you. Sorry, colleagues. These are, the technological challenges that are usual. I've just checked with Sean and he's back, and it seems we will go back to Sean and come back to Mwadhini. His presentation was just getting into, its climax, was getting so interesting, looking into the SDGs and the figures that he was sharing. I don't know, Sean, could you pick it from, I see Mwadhini is back. Mwadhini, you want to proceed?
Yes, I would like to proceed. I don't know why I have lost. Do you hear me, Mr. Evans?
Yes, we can now hear you. You can pick it up from where you stopped.
Okay, so I was trying to introduce you to the communities under reflection, which I'm trying to share the successes. And I would say, I would like to say that I will talk much about Morogoro, Kinondoni, Mwanza, and the Arusha municipalities. And I will also be able to share some socio-economic characteristics of beneficiaries. So I started saying that the majority of Tanzania Community Foundation beneficiaries are young and female.
Yeah.
Do you hear me, my friend? Hello? Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Kindly remove the video and just speak. Mr. Mwadhini, kindly remove the video and speak. Now
Hello?
you can speak. Just go through the presentation without necessarily projecting it, so that we reduce the bandwidth so that we can hear you.
Mr. Mark, are you talking about Mianza or Sean?
Yes. I'm
Mianza.
talking. Yes, Mianza. Kindly.
Okay, thank you.
We
so
can
let
hear
me
you.
Let me go quickly because of this problem of networking. The project programs which I'm trying to share is, the first one is the garbage collection and the processing project. This project, of course, geared us to mobilize about $5,000, and the main part of the fund came from the individuals. And we tried also to link with the Sokoine University of Agriculture to make sure that we have about 4 or 5 groups which are concentrating this activity. And this, of course, was geared to the SDG #1 and #2, poverty and no hunger, because the outcome of this project was actually targeted to improve the agriculture, especially small-scale gardens in primary school and the community level. As you see, we have this process of collected garbages, and these are ready for sorting and processing. Am I in the line? Can you get me? Hello, do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. At least I can hear very clearly.
The second activity is youth development platforms. We managed to mobilize $2,700, and our aim was mostly concentrating in Arusha. And what we have supported these people is, first of all, to form a youth platform, which later established their shops. So this is a joint action program under this group, which now is going there, and what they are benefiting is to increase their income at their own level, and they are managing also to get other important grown-up people, and they can also manage to send their children to school. We have the linking youth contribution that the project contributes actually SDG #1, poverty and hunger, since what they are doing is actually reflected in the improving of the life, but also some have also stores for agribusiness products like tomato and so on and so on. They have stores outside their houses. So I'm also wanted to go to the tree nurseries and the vegetable gardens. We managed to contribute 80,250. So thanks also the Eco Agriculture Organization, which help community in Arusha area. They have also done something to make sure that these groups are going on. And our target there is to meet the SDG #2 and also 1. Apart from that, we have managed to establish a community micro groups. We call it Vikoba in our own language. We have a reach of $50,000 from these groups, and they are trying now to use the money which they get to initiate their small investments. And of course, we have linked their efforts with the local government authority to benefit also from the 10% of the fund which are collected by the local government authority. We have a system that 4% will go to women, 4% will go to youth, and 2% will go to disabled. So this is the benefit we are also linking with the efforts of the local government authority. Are we together? Hello?
Yes, 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 Mr. Mwadini,
Yes.
we can hear you clearly.
I'm trying to check if I'm alone or we are together.
We are.
So number 6, number 6 is the educational support program. We have managed also to think about the problems which are facing our primary schools. And here we are talking about linking our efforts with the national priorities of supporting the hard difficulties youth, difficulties students and primary schools. And we have an example of 7 children who have got support from our network. And one is already completed the university level, And we are trying also to make sure that we increase the number of supporting these students who are coming from the poor families. And here we are trying also to demonstrate what is happening in terms of supporting the school children with materials like handbags, pencils, and so on, but also uniform. We have also the energy efficient firewood, and this actually is reflecting to improve the cooking stoves, especially in Arusha. And what we have done there is to mobilize a tune of $500, which have been distributed to this group, but also it is a continuous process because we are also linking with the other organizations which are interested to work with these children. As you see, these are stoves, yes, but what we are trying to make sure here is to save the charcoal from the trees. And what they are using here is a technology which has been imparted by other organizations, looking for trainers come to stand with these people and doing whatever they have done. This is according to the goal number 2, zero hunger, but also we are linking with the climate change number 13. We have also empowering vulnerable groups. According to our records, we have mobilized about 5,000 since we started, but also we are trying to make sure that we look downwards to work with the students, to work with the street children, and so on and so on. But here you find some of the groups which we have tried to share with them, but we also trying to make sure that we are talking about gender. And here is where we are linking our activities with goal number 1 and the number 4. That means gender aspect. And you see, these are the pictures of the hardships, the difficulties people, disabled, and the other people with specific problems. We are trying to mobilize funds and give them the support like as you see in the picture. Let me also try to share about the Metal Smith. The Metal Smith is a group of people with children, with their young people. What they are trying to do is to make sure that they recycle the dust which they waste, the metal waste which they are picking around the cities. And these days they are also ordering these items from Dar es Salaam. But what they are doing here is to manufacture the wick lamp and distribute it to the village levels, which electricity problem is also limited. And we are trying to share whatever skills we have in collaboration with the small scale industry development organization here and the other people who have the knowledge of wick lamps development, to make sure that the group has managed to save their interest. But here is according to the goal number 1 and the climate change, because they are working also in cleaning the city. We have done also other responses, flood events in Kilosa area and Magole, where we managed to collect $75,000. And we happened also to work with our hospital here to share our facilities to the ward maternity ward, where we distributed wheelchairs and fans, of course, and the blankets, of course, the bed sheets. We managed to distribute this to the ward maternity level. Of course, we are looking for women hardships when they are there, especially during delivering. They need this kind of facilities, and this was the request from the hospital. We managed to do it. A tune of $7,500 were collected by that time. But also we link with the government priority to help the primary schools to have desks, and we managed to distribute 150 desks to the community. Of course, 2 primary schools here, a tune of $20,000. But the last one was during the COVID-19 that we also mobilized the funds, and we managed to distribute the support of 4,500 to our communities, especially for 80 groups. So what we have done here is to rate the relevance of the interventions, starting from agriculture, as you see the percentage there, coming down to the revolving fund, and as well as women entrepreneurship. This is the distribution of the fund. We are trying to link with different partners and distribute it to these groups. Let me say briefly that the partners who have contributed a lot to our foundation is we are not working alone. We go back to where we started. That was the World Bank, TASAF, Global Fund for Community Foundation, SAT, SUA, local government authorities of the areas we are talking about. But also the current potential backups to our efforts. We are talking about SGS Consulting, which they have supported us also to improve our working performance in research. And they have also supported us to prepare a 5-year strategic plan. And we believe that when this will be completed, we'll be able to link the SDGs indicators properly on how we can implement effectively. But also the APN, they have supported us last year to document what I'm trying to talk today, because before that time it was difficult to know what specifically we have done. But now at least we know exactly, because we have the documentation, we have also the social media, we have also the website which you can work with the others. But also the EAPN, East African Philanthropy Network, we have been receiving the software skills and exposures. This has also contributed to our level we are talking about now, the social media, financial institutions, and the potential individuals, without forgetting the element of corporate social responsibility, which we have successfully received a big amount from that side. So here I'm trying to recommend that we need closer collaboration. We need to recognize voluntary programs and the project. Of course, that they need a close support, because what we have done here is just a low level achievement, but we are trying now to combine these all efforts to come up with a basket fund, which can give them the satisfaction to run what they are trying to put in their day-to-day plans. But also interventions is actually complemented by the government. So we needed to stand very close to the government to make sure that the financial and technical support also from the people from that side are necessary. But also community foundations programs are demand-driven issue, and the community foundations are potential platform for the community-driven development. So we should also recognize this, and we are linking with the government to make sure that we stand with the policy of the government, and we are sure that we can get also their contribution effectively. But also it is an effective way to ensure the inclusions of the most vulnerable marginalized groups. Here we have been recognized by the local government authority. We are doing a good job. So we wish that we should also get power to support to move ahead on this issue. Apart from the government, we have the collaboration with other development partners, and we are still looking for how better we can stand with the basket fund, which can be geared to improve what they have already been done at the lower level. My colleagues, those are the few things I would like to share with you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Bwana Mwadhini, for the sharing you've given us, and particularly that you managed to pull through the contributions at the community level that have gone into the various SDGs. We are sorry for the technical bit that did not allow you to share the screen, but we will be able to share the presentations with the participants here. Now, picking it up from there, we would want to go back to Sean Samuels, who had just started to give us the breakdown in terms of the sustainability elements around running community foundations. Just as Mr. Mwadini has pointed out, there is substantial resources within the communities, yes? The issues of mobilizing these resources, tying them to the need of the community and making it possible that the community can intervene at the challenge levels where they are. Mr. Samuels, would you try, please, and get on and see if we can get through this for now? Welcome.
Thank you, Mike, and apologies. As you know, in South Africa, we're facing significant load shedding. I'm also in the bush, so I had to get into the car and try and drive off to a point where we can get better reception. Mike, are you sort of saying that we should speak through the presentation, or should I try and share?
Try and share so that then we can walk through it here.
Work through it. Okay. Let me do that. You can see?
Yes, we can see. We can see it now. Yeah.
Okay. So what I was actually sort of saying, and as was said by the previous speaker, we have been supporting TCFN and others more at an institutional ODD development point of view. And this is where an interesting synergy could actually result with Silvio and ourselves, who have these online tools, but we do the hands-on sort of work at the grassroots level. So I'm going to be speaking about some of the challenges that we face, especially when it comes to funding and fundraising. But I'm also going to raise some critical issues and hope that we can get some kind of discussion going around some of these things. So if we talk about community foundations, for example, here you see a definition, largely US-based, non-profit, publicly supported, with long-term goal of building permanent named funds for the broad-based public benefit of the residents in the given area. And I suppose what's implicit within this is that this is a philanthropic organization. It has the ability, or should have the ability, as is suggested on the right, to be able to unlock resources, as was said previously, around an asset lens, the ability to hold those resources, and then also to grant them. And I think there's a lot of preoccupation with the grant making, which is actually very good, because we know the power of small targeted grants to help activate community development. We know that these community foundations are largely place-based. They are supposed to be multi-themed, and in a sense do the kind of things that the TCFN has actually been explaining, and we've observed these localized sort of development processes that we largely refer to as horizontal giving, where we tap into the informal, horizontally sort of driven community assets. And I think Tete and I was quite explicit around how we understand those the different assets. But where does the community foundation actually fit in the NPO landscape? And this is where we begin to see perhaps some challenges that faces the notion or the concept of a community foundation. So this certainly for us in Africa is a new institutional form. I think the issue around horizontal giving has been with us since the beginning of time. The kind of institutional forms to help organize and unlock that horizontal informal giving has also been around with us: social movements, community-based organizations, some of the NGOs, etc. And of course, we've introduced this institutional form called the Community Foundation. So it feels new, but its work is as part of communities having to take control of their own development, has also been done and driven by a whole range of other sort of community-based sort of institutional forms. The issue around, and you may have a sort of a response to this, but the community foundation in its classic sense, I would argue, has no actually real memory or footprint when it comes to addressing the fundamental substantive development challenges we face in the continent. issues around the post-colonial impacts, and they are broad, from the extractive industries through to the stripping of our cultural assets as a people of Africa, driving inequality, and even in South Africa, we also have this issue around community share ownership, but the extent of the wealth that is extracted makes that portion of community ownership quite laughable in a sense. The growing income poverty, natural disasters, and the lack of preparedness for disasters. We had a flood in Durban, KZN, one of our provinces. And as a country which is supposed to be a developable, let's say a middle income country or upper middle income, we were completely unprepared to address those kind of issues, etc. The community foundation, when it comes to money, financial resources, I know there's a balance with non-financial, but when it comes to financial resources, there is a distinct trust deficit, and you really have to work hard, especially in the context of this lifestyles off the back of giving, off the back of others that are sponsoring you. Communities observe these things quite carefully. So while self-determination and getting communities to control their own development is very important, you also have to realize that communities are very circumspect, very cautious, certainly in some of the countries and contexts we've been working in, around whether we can trust you with our limited resources. We come from income poor sort of environments. And then, of course, controversially, a community foundation, which is essentially place-based, could also be seen as too localized to make any substantive difference beyond that local community. And maybe in our instances, it is okay that we make those differences in that localized environment. But is there a bigger role for community foundations to actually play? And that's a question that I would put to you. Because these significant challenges, if you look at it, are we any close as a community foundation to, in a sense, form part of networks and collaboration and solidarity to address issues as big as the challenges that we face here? For example, the median age in Africa, I think, is 19 years. Tendai can give us the more sort of accurate academic sort of figures. And this is certainly not a youth bulge, it's a youth dividend. It's about youth seen as an asset and not as a liability. But if you look at the changing nature of work and labor, the corruption, the gender-based violence that is growing, extractivism, these are the key fundamental issues. And what we struggle with is how we locate the community foundation, maybe in its humblest form, to help address some of these issues. Because if you're not addressing some of or in the pipeline to helping with some of these significant challenges, then you're on the sidelines and you're in the shadows. And the question to us is, for community foundations, is it okay for us to be in the shadows, on the sidelines, highly localized? Again, will be interesting to get your views around that. So that is just the context and the background that we struggle with around how we locate and place a community foundation within this. But let me just refer to some of the crossroads. And here is one key one. We are standing at the nexus, at the interface between vertical and horizontal giving. So the vertical forms of giving are your formal forms, corporate social investment, high net worth, etc., etc. And the question is, how do we create the interface with all this horizontal, informal, community-led, hopefully community-led and driven development, where communities are actually using their own resources, unlocking their own resources. But this unlocking, this asset lens is critical and is empowering, but it could also be reactive, in the sense that we are leaving government unaccountable to do what it is mandated to do with the kind of tax currencies or tax rand or whatever, etc., that they are tasked to manage. Are we guilty of creating a parallel universe? Because government is not dealing with ECD, we create our own ECD pipeline in a sense, and we leave government to itself. Another controversial sort of element. We stand at the nexus, the interface between tradition and modernity, like you see in the picture. And part of the tradition is that we come from a rich history and culture of indigenous giving. which we stand to lose. It is phasing out. Even as our older people are moving on with their institutional memory, our younger people are not interested in the fascinating principles that lie behind traditional giving. And then, so how do we bring those principles and how do we modernize traditional giving in the modern world, in the urban fringe, in this whole process of urbanization, which is happening at the rapid pace? Because from the rural and from those kinds of environments, we stand to lose some of these incredible practices. And then, of course, between the third and the fourth industrial revolution, some of those things. So again, it is good for the Community Foundation to have its little grants program to be dealing with localized assets unlocking, and there is no judgment in terms of that. This is just a question of how we locate the Community Foundation into these broader things. This is an example of the interface between vertical and horizontal. In our work with community foundations, we place them at this interface, sort of saying that your competence is one to unlock the horizontal informal giving and assets, but you can't leave it there. You can't leave corporate to be unaccountable or government to be unaccountable because they hold resources. Corporates, for example, the markets are our people that buy their products. So the Community Foundation has to exist at that interface between vertical and horizontal to say to a corporate, to government, here's a community, they've come to the table, they've unlock the assets, but you have to support them. You have to challenge what they bring to the table, double it or whatever else, so that development can actually sort of take place. Yeah, it's just a picture. I think we use this at the APN conference around just doing research. And in the next year, we want to do a lot more of this research. I mean, no others are doing it around how do we identify all the indigenous practices across our countries. I think as South Africa, we've managed to get the word Ubuntu used globally, but there's a whole range of other notions, concepts of giving, of working together that we need to educate the world around, that we need to really be proud of, so that we stop looking to the West for affirmation, because I think we have to realize that Westernization is actually standing in the way of our African innovation. And I think that's an important element for us to discuss. And then, of course, sorry, there's a hand there, should have been darker. But this interface between us as a people and this whole technological explosion and how we sort of locate ourselves within that. So then just finally then, coming to survival. I know that there's a lot of emphasis on grants and grant making, and that should continue because it is extremely powerful as an approach to activate or support development. But it is difficult to raise funds. As Madini was sort of saying, if we're looking at a broader basket, is where do we get this funding from? Because we have limited to no access to endowments. And in fact, high net worth individuals with such a great trust deficit is not going to hand a pot of money over to a community foundation. It is difficult to get CSI to channel funding through us as community foundations. Here we are grant makers. Use us as the medium. Use us as a donor advised. But many of them would rather do that themselves. High net worth individuals give through their own institutionalized channels. They either got a business, they may have a CSI department, they may have a trust, and they may have staff that give on their behalf. And so it's difficult to get behind that. I mean, even the issue of the extractives industry, where they have to make funding available, they tend to form trusts. And those trusts are problematic, especially in South Africa, that holds money on behalf of the community, but it is unaccountable. We don't know who are the trustees. We don't know who holds the check. And there is a lot of work that we could do to position the CF to become or to manage that kind of trust on behalf of the community. Of course, the international declining in donor funding and this growing localization, where NGOs who are getting less funding at the global, at the regional level, are finding it expedient to nationalize themselves so that they can also get access, and they tend to then also dominate. So essentially what I'm arguing is that our value proposition, and it's not as if we have answers here, we're trying to work through this, but our value proposition as a community foundation in unlocking community assets makes perfect sense, but it is a weak proposition when we're having to be at that interface between that vertical giving, the boardroom of corporates, the government departments that hold financial resources, and a whole range of others that must help us. So this is the reality. Grant making alone will not sustain the CF. We're going to have to do something more than spending time trying to get grants, trying to build community affiliated funds, which is good, managing giver circles, which is good. We have to do more than that. And it seems as if community foundations may be forced to move into more programmatic intervention work, another controversial nexus or crossroads, because some of our donors don't want to see this happen. They want you to be the grant maker, which is good. But if your thematic work is going to generate a lot more revenue for you as an organization, then survival instinct kicks in and you have to do what you need to do in order to sustain your value. So in essence, and I'm closing soon, to be effective in our continent with all of its fundamental issues, we can't just be raising money for grants. And we can't just be unlocking assets in a way that is reactive, where communities do their own thing. We have to build voice, agency, and self-determination. Because look at the issues: social justice, climate justice, energy justice, disaster preparedness. Where and when do we make our mark there? And in order to build voice, agency, and self-determination, in order to build a demand culture. So in other words, we're not just unlocking the assets of this community, but we need to build a voice and a sense of a demand culture that they need to demand of corporates themselves and government for what is due to them as per mandate, as per constitution. But this means that community foundations have to be inherently political, with an active voice, not a quiet voice, an activist voice, in order to build a demand culture. And it is here where the tensions lie, where community foundations would say, but this is too high risk, it is too political, it is too polarizing. But how then are we going to address some of these fundamental sort of issues? So where will funding come from? Local community assets, that's what we are specializing in. That is this fundamental paradigm, which I think we should really grow and even form our networks around. But we need to locate our community foundations at that interface. There has to be a demand element around accessing and getting funding from the vertical sources. We have to position ourselves as a conduit for government. This is also a fine balancing act, because we can deliver nothing at scale if we're not involving government. But how do we keep the spaces to still keep government accountable? We have to offer a business proposition to corporates, even speaking their language. We need to learn this. We need to get out of our mode of just having to write a little proposal in order to access money. We need to engage in local enterprise development. I think TCFN was talking about some of the products that we could look at that and see corporate shared value or share ownership value that Tendai was in a sense speaking of. But finally, what has to change? It's certainly our value proposition as community foundations moving forward over the next sort of 3 years. We need to offer a very clear argument, and this one is not easy, about what are the social returns on investment. So in other words, we have to stop trying to sell our work by what we do, but rather by why we do it and what is the result. Donors do not want to invest in your workshops and your training. They want to invest in the results. And this is where we are challenged around what are our social returns. We have to get into the technological age in a much bigger way. And this in itself is a challenge. If you look at digital poverty or the digital divide, but we can certainly bring our partners closer. And I would argue, controversially, I know some of the donors even may not be happy with me, but we have to reduce our obsession with grants and invest a lot more time in getting communities to be self-determined in their development, take by much greater responsibility, have that demand culture, have that voice, etc. And this is where I want to leave it at, Mike, with the question, so what do you think? Thank you very much.
Sean, that you put the ball squarely on the court of each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we have to go beyond the current mode, that we have to think differently in terms of what we do as community foundations, but also look at our engagement levels. Friends and participants in this, I believe Sean has brought everything home, as it were. He has put together some of the things that came through from Dr. Morisa and what Mr. Mianza had brought together. I think by chance, technically, as we had the challenge, I think it was proper then that you came last, because you put this in a way that we need now to interrogate who we are as community practitioners, and particularly at that level where we are looking at where next. Thank you so much, Sean, for provoking our thinking. I want to come back to all of us, and those who may have questions they want to raise, like we said, if you could put them on the chat, or if you're ready, we could give you an opportunity. Just raise your hand and you can put in your contributions. As we are looking through this, Sean has thrown around, particularly the last two slides, were a great way to summarize the things we are looking at. That one, we need to think our value proposition, seriously so, as community foundations, but also practitioners on the ground. What is it? What are we bringing? Two, we are looking at how best do we work with government, just as we want to be the conduit of government for development on the ground, but also how do we hold government in, as it were, to account in some of the areas. Yes, I can see a hand up. George, kindly unmute and welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. Really inspiring what you've talked about. What I'm struggling with is how do local community philanthropy organizations demonstrate impact, and how do they position themselves amidst all this competition that's really becoming even bigger, because most of the international NGOs are also positioning as local entities to access the funding that's coming in through different avenues. So how do they really stand out, and what can they uniquely sell that will make them more competitive? Thank you.
Hey, George, thank you so much. I think as we go along, we want to welcome Sean, possibly Sean, and even Dr. Tendai, as we contribute to this debate. Welcome, Sean. We begin from you and possibly go to Dr.
Okay, can you hear me, Mike?
Yes, I can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can hear you.
So George, that is a great question, and I think you know, in the way that, and I think we're also guilty of this as SGS Consulting, in the way that we've helped to establish community foundations, we have also, in a sense, made the error of characterizing them as a special child, almost completely unique, and therefore they must have a unique sort of selling point. What we're realizing is community foundations cannot work on alone and cannot be that highly localized. One of the key questions we get asked is, so what's the difference between an NGO and a CBO and a community foundation? And so part of our response to that is that we are all working at the grassroots. We are all, in a sense, trying to unlock local assets. But perhaps one of the key determining factors, and maybe one of the competitive edges, or let's say comparative edges rather, is that the community foundation, we would want to hope and see, would specialize in unlocking those community assets and allowing communities to use this for their own development. But that contradicts with the points I made around the obsession with the grant making An NGO typically has a thematic interest, education, ECD, we'll do training in that and this and that. And we're trying to position that community foundation at that interface that I'd shown in one of the slides, unlocking horizontal and showing how that is done and where that is done. TCFN has given us great examples, but they also have to show where they've been successful in linking that horizontal with the vertical forms of giving. But when we talk about impact in the final analysis, then the community foundation has to join forces with social movements and other sort of say that this is what we are contributing towards, not that this is alone our particular success, because that could end up being highly localized. I'm sort of just giving you this kind of response and hope that we could have some kind of dialogue around it. But let me leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I want to throw the same question to Dr. Tendai. Dr. Tendai, looking at these challenges as George has put them, how do we go about this?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Mike, and also George. Thanks to Sean for that very illuminating presentation. Very important, the way you sort of tied things together. I think it's very important, colleagues, for two things to happen for us as well in this African conversation, is to appreciate that the phenomena or the entities under discussion are at their formative stage. There is a tendency, and it's killing organization, there's a tendency to quickly compare ourselves with our northern counterparts. And also, that's one, that they are young. But number two, they are not being allowed space to emerge in an organic form. We are trying to manage it quickly, throw money, try to do things. And in the process, we are creating NGOs by another name. Because community foundations, by their very nature, should be community-based and driven, linked to the issues around that community. So before you even go to talk about impact, those are very important considerations. And also the space to navigate, to develop, to find a niche, et cetera, et cetera. Then I think coming back to the impact issue, I think it's also the measures, the metrics we use in terms of discussing what has been the impact. We also, again, in this space, we rely heavily on borrowed concepts and frameworks to an extent that we may miss out on what communities are doing. The first level of impact is try establishing community solidarity. That's very important. It's not something that you can measure or allocate a value, but the fact that it exists and communities can come together and say to themselves, how do we overcome this problem? Already the fact that there is a platform in Community X that is seized with such questions is a major starting point. So for many of our initiatives, that's the first way of saying we're measuring impact by existence and by how embedded this platform is within the communities. The second way we measure is the extent to which it's mobilizing agency within the community. Because what we're dealing with is a disrupted African fabric, a social fabric, that has been messed up by different interventions imported from elsewhere, that have reduced our people to be bystanders to watch you do the work. But here we're saying that citizens, communities have to be engaged in fixing public problems. And this is what we really need when we're talking about community foundations. Communities that are engaged and are seized with matters at their level, that are not waiting for a big government, or a big NGO or a big donor, but communities that are using the little that they have to try to fix problems. So already, if those ingredients exist in a community, we are on the path to success. We may not have achieved it. We may not achieve all the SDGs as listed up, but what we have is we have a great start. And I think for us, the energy, given that we're supporting infrastructure, we're supporting this, the fact that it makes it easy for Sean to go into a community as SGS consulting and identify something that already exists, that is tapping into assets, and try to help it to say, what is the next level? What are the pitfalls to avoid based on experiences from elsewhere? Already we should consider that a success. But the real threat and I will repeat this, is for us not to use borrowed terms when we're talking about impact. That's the challenge, to say that whenever they get it, that's the challenge of fundraising and being grant dependent, because when they get these grants, they are also given these templates to use to measure. And those templates make them to look outward, to begin to report more to donors than to their communities. So storytelling becomes a very important part and parcel of this community foundation as it emerges, that it has the capability to tell its story and to make sure that its story is heard. And when it's telling its story, on the one hand, it's not a story for all of us who are outsiders, but it's also a story to mobilize the community itself, so that community members see themselves in the success that is in the story. That becomes very important for us to mobilize what we may call loosely the different terms that Sean used, Ubuntu. For us to mobilize that agency, to mobilize that Ubuntu, people have to see themselves as agents of change, because that's a mindset shift that has to happen, especially in communities that have over the years become overly dependent on NGOs. So for us to undo that framework or that mindset and come to a place of saying, Vuvuzenzele, which is an approach in Zimbabwe and South Africa, to say, wake up and do it for yourself. As a community, you have to be characterized by action rather than complaints. That's when we begin to see things moving. That's very important as a starting point. Thanks.
Dr. That puts things in such a huge perspective. The agency element changes a lot of this, and particularly looking at it from the perspective of who we are as a people and how we organize, how we mobilize, how we intervene. Well, before I say much more, there is a question too that has come through from Caleb Wanga. How do foundations work in an environment that has thriving corruption, where duty bearers demand bribes to facilitate official processes? Possibly throwing this back to the participants here, the practitioners here. We would want to hear your experiences. How do you operate in environments where then the duty bearers are demanding, as it possibly how things have been, and how do you handle these difficulties of demands from those that we expect to lead the way? Possibly I want to give Caleb, you could possibly unmute and put your question in context, and then we can get the discussion going.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Welcome,
much, Mike. I am asking this because of the political environment that sometimes we operate as civil society organizations. You find a situation where duty bearers, mostly the regulatory authorities that guide whatever we are doing within the law, some in environment where there is massive corruption, there is massive nepotism, favoritism, because sometimes donor agencies also demand government endorsements to support certain institutions. But this is what the duty bearers know very well, that they have the key to that. So sometimes they demand, they end up undermining the great work that some of the institutions, be they foundations, be they just normal NGOs, CBOs, FBOs, how they operate. You realize that there's a lot of interference in the work. So how can a vibrant civil society institution, be it a foundation, be it an NGO, be it a CBO, be it a FBO, how can it thrive well? Possibly we work in different legal environments, that are here, and of accountability mechanism from the government that can make our working environment also good. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. That is now in context. I possibly want to go back to Sean. Again, from the vantage point that you see it, and having worked in the community for this many years, how do we handle this situation?
Thank you very much, Caleb, for that complicated question. I think this is a challenge that we are all actually trying to find answers to. It speaks to the values that we operate from. It speaks to whether we have a price on our heads in order to do whatever is required by these corrupt officials. I think in some of our cases, what has helped is that organizations don't operate on their own, because if you are isolated and on your own, you are more prone to this kind of sort of behavior and the directives. That where organizations are sort of banding together, that raises critical voice. But on the other hand, we've also noted, and I'm not too sure if this is easy in your country context, we've also drawn on media allies. We've also started drawing on journalists and writers and editors that we draw closer to the kind of processes that we're trying to deal with. And then without having to isolate by name the particular, let's call it perpetrator who was trying to bribe, we tend to then highlight in our media some of these sort of challenges with the hope that it puts pressure on these institutions and on these persons. But at the moment, we are really drowning and struggling around how we needing to resist this kind of sort of behavior. And it boils down to how strong we are in actually maintaining our value system. And if we do that, sometimes we get isolated. So there's a price to pay. But I think there's a whole lot of other officials we've also discovered that are not as corrupt and that we can also appeal to. But I can't, in a sense, give you a definitive answer, except to sort of say these are ongoing experiences. And we have a lot of conversations around how we are needing to mitigate, reduce, or respond to people that stand at the doorway of either power or financial resources, but they have their price. And how do we, in a sense, try and circumvent them, go around them, find friends elsewhere within that department so that we can actually bring pressure to bear. But it will be useful to hear from some of the other country representatives here how they are possibly dealing with this.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Samuel. That points out to possible pathways in which organizations on the ground can handle this. I want to give the opportunity to Mwadhini, possibly working again on the ground. What is it like? How do you respond to these challenges of corruption from the authorities? How do you handle it in Tanzania?
Thank you, Mr. Mark. And first of all, let me appreciate the contributions of Dr. Murisa and Mr. Sean. That is the real thing happening in the ground. But the interpretation of what we are doing could be also overpowered by the other concepts which are existing in the ground. But let me go straight to the corruption. We have a system where we cannot ask for money unless we put the reason of looking for money openly. And this is done by the community themselves, as well as approved by the leadership before taking what they have written to the partner who can be ready to contribute. So whatever you are getting from the partner will go direct to the people. Maybe the corruption side could be how we are going to use it at the community level, but not to get the money which is targeted to reach the community. And secondly, I would see the corruption, the minimal corruption at the community level when we are talking about the corporate social responsibility, especially when we are linking with the government to ask the business community to contribute to what we are intending to do at the community level. They need to get a receipt, and this receipt is attached with the tax returns to the government. That is the way they can be exempted to pay the taxation to the government. So if we get the money, definitely at the end of the day, it will be witnessed by other authorities, and it will be asked if the difference is there. But also the corruption at the community level is very different from other organizations, because as the other two speakers, Sean and Dr. Murisa, we are talking about the community-driven priorities. And in that respect, we are very sure that the community will be the speaker number one on the fund or whatever contribution directed to them. So that is what I would respond in relation to corruption, how I feel as a community foundation development worker, see the way the improvement of corruption can be minimized in the level of community foundations operations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayanza. That also gives a bit of perspective of what happens in Tanzania. I want to quickly open this to Dr. Murisa, if you have a perspective on this, before we open it to the rest of the members.
I have no perspective on this. Let's hear what others have to say. It's tough.
Indeed, yeah. We want to open it to the rest of the members. I would want to hear what your perspectives are on this. I know we have representatives from Rwanda. I don't know if you would give us a feel of how community organizations operate in Rwanda in terms of these issues around corruption. Well, as then we continue, while people are mulling around this, we want to also acknowledge we've gotten a response from Maurice. Maurice feels that, yes, he agrees with many of the propositions here. And he says there is need to learn cutting from the over-dependence on grants, yes. But he also has an interesting perspective that, you know, the larger corporates here, the GIZs and the USAIDs and the others may have begun as philanthropy that come from the other side to our countries. But essentially that we need to go back and look at how we organize at the community levels, looking at what we call here circles and cooperatives that have been working around here. Thank you so much, Maurice, for this. Again, looking at some of the things that came through from the presentations from the three facilitators, it is clear that we have a clear pathway for organizations, again, working at the grassroots levels, the community foundations, the way in which we are touching onto the community resources. Dr. Tendai, there is this element of mobilizing resources of members of the community that are beyond the community, who may have gone abroad, you know, learning from the education system where we have been touching around alumni. We could equally possibly be looking at them as alumni of our villages. And we may want to challenge the community agents that are on the ground, the community foundations that are mobilizing, to start looking at an opportunity to look at the alumni who are away. They could be in our major cities within the countries or abroad, as you did point out. We need to be able to tackle this. We have had an experience in the last month in October, just before we got to the conference in Entebbe. In one of our forums in Tanzania, one of our facilitators did indicate a similar approach, that they went into a village and found that when we were looking at the local resources, many, the local people talked about their sons and daughters who are away. And this small group, actually coming from students, started reaching out to these people who are directly in touch, getting in touch directly with them and asking them to support the initiative they had, which was around water. This, for me, is a live example on how we can get in touch and pull in local resources, as it were, wherever they are, to contribute beyond just the immediate family where they've been supporting. I want to believe this and many other examples would offer an opportunity for community foundations, not just to tap into material resources, but also the opportunity to continue looking at the agency of people who are living beyond the community, support in terms of technical expertise, support in terms of knowledge that is available to the community, and work around to grow these communities. So as we wind down, I want to give back to our facilitators today to give us their last words, their last round of comments in terms of then reflecting what the others have said and the discussions we have had. I want to begin from Dr. Tendai and then come down to Mr. Muyanza and finally to Sean. Welcome, Dr. Tendai.
Okay, thank you very much. First is to thank you, colleagues, for having me. It's an honor and it's a privilege to have this discussion. And as we head towards holidays, I can only say that before I do my final remarks, because I may forget this, is to wish you happy holidays and a prosperous 2023. But back to the issue under discussion. I think the conversation under discussion is a very powerful conversation. Even the issues that I was sort of reluctant to respond to do with corruption, et cetera, is to understand that what is under challenge in many African countries is the concept of citizenship. And citizens are those who are engaged in solving public problems. This one, and we say that the essential ingredient of democracy is citizenship. So if citizens are coming together and engaging in what we are calling community philanthropy, the model, even the power, it shifts from power holders, office holders, the chefs, the chiefs, into the common people. Our democratic systems become more accountable, because if you were to go to Nakuru and found a community that is engaged, that is fixing public problems without your involvement as an MP, as a politician, you are worried, because half the time you've become so used to having them come to your office to beg you to build them a school, to build them a bridge. But if now they're not even coming, but when you drive to Nakuru into one community and you find that, oh, that bridge that you had promised that you're going to do, the community has done it. The school, the community has done it. The children are being fed at a school using local assets, local resources, and local organizations. Then it means that your level of intervention at a political level has to be at a certain level of dignity and respect. You are now engaging citizens who are already engaged in the work that they are doing. So it's very powerful for us to begin to talk of this, not just looking at it as a survival strategy, but to look at it as, number one, meeting the twin goals of democracy and development. And this is a development that communities are shaping, not NGOs who come up with strategies designed in New York or whatever, but these are strategies they're designing on their own. So that's how important this conversation is. And it's powerful because it's liberating us, it's liberating us from two twin forces of exploitation, the government itself and the markets. We're beginning to do things on our own. So this is very important for us. So the next stage is to say, how then do we play a catalytic role to make sure that this is realized? So we have to tap into all the cases of best practice, the islands of best practice across Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, and to begin to mold and talk about these best practices and promote them so that others can adapt, replicate, and also begin to implement. So when we have this, I will use the term that Sean used, when this begins to be seen as a social movement, not as a little office for some Bwana or some little elites in some area, but this is what people are doing. We begin to have a social movement that is being funded by the people and is working for the people and is addressing people's needs, real needs that they identify themselves. Until we realize that, that's when we begin even to shift our mindsets to say, as people working in infrastructure organization, as people holding offices in these organizations, how do we make sure that we are not holding back the energy, but we actually become the fuel for really making sure that this happens? And the best way of doing it is to bring in best practices from other regions and making sure that our people catch on this and will continue to provide the technical support that they need so that we reduce that dependence on grants. Because amongst ourselves, based on different studies we have seen, there's a growing middle class in Africa, and this middle class is beginning to fund ventures outside our only homes and our grandmothers who need to go to hospital. But this middle class is located both in Africa and in the diaspora. So that's the middle class that we need to bring to these conversations so that it plays a part in supporting the future of community philanthropy. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ari, for those closing remarks. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much. You know, speaking after Dendai is a hard act to follow. But I wish to say that what is important is this, you know, there's this issue of when you put a frog in the water and apparently, I don't know how true it is, the scientists can tell us that if you heat the water, the frog adapts and may even die from the hot water, you know. And I think quite often we in our countries, we are like that frog. Things are happening and we become so disconnected. That it almost, if something is bad, it's like load shedding in South Africa, we are like the frog. It's becoming normal, you know? And so voice and agency and a demand culture actually reduces. And so what I'm trying to say is that the one key thing that's important is this paradigm shift that should be at the heart of all we do, that communities can do, that they do have assets, even in resource poor environments, that they have voice and agency, and we can build the self-determination for them to lead their own development. I think that should be at the heart of development of the CF Community Foundation work. And in response to these years and generations of being told and voices, messages reinforced around the fact that communities don't have assets, they can't do, etc. So I think breaking away and allowing communities to take control, I think, is one of the greatest shifts. And then, of course, we need the kind of institutional forms that must enable this. And I think this is where the Community Foundation can play a critical role in terms of its value proposition, in terms of its positioning, in terms of small targeted grants. Even though I've made issues about grants, I think it's still important. But I do think that community foundations need to almost acquire an activist orientation. I do think they need to come out of the shadows. And I do think that they need to almost, in a sense, spot the problems. For example, we had this massive flood in Durban, 500 people died, thousands of homes were destroyed, all the big organizations coming, Gift of the Givers, UN, etc., and they get our people safe from the waters. And they all go home. And I think this is where, and all the giving stops because now things have normalized. But for the family that lost that household, their crisis is only starting. And I think it's these moments where a community foundation must understand and realize, and even many NGOs would pull back and say, we've done our work, people are safe, but their lives have been destroyed. And so I think there's a lot of work that community foundations could do, but it has to raise its voice. It has to be critical. But most importantly, it has to form alliances with others. And so that it's part of a much bigger force that's trying to effect change. Maybe through that, it can even influence its fellow NGOs and CBOs to begin to focus in on unlocking assets so that communities reduce, as Tendai says, their dependence not only on foreign grant making, but even on NGOs who are coming in now as the local saviors, and communities are waiting to be served. So I think agency and communities taking control of their own development and having organizations to help grow and inspire this, I think, is critical for the way forward. And thank you very much. And of course, wishing you all a safe and festive rest. It's been a tough, not only last year, but a tough 3 years that we've come out of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Thank you so much for, again, putting it in words in a way that just pulls the process towards a way forward. Mr. Muyanza, your final comments?
Thank you so much. And I'm so much pleased to see that today we are 49 people attending this important session. And this gives me the niche that we are really going back to see how better we can implement the community foundations concept. This is actually a holistic practice of natural life. And no one can escape from the community foundation. It is where the life beginning. We have been born there, and we should also respect what is going on in our community. And what we have talked today is just reminding us that everyone has something to play in encouraging people to be involved in the community foundation operations. I have had several issues which we are going to use them to improve our performance. The first thing is attitude. When we talk about the attitude, yes, we are in the real life of changes, but the community foundation pattern will not change because it is the place where to learn and integrate modernity to improve our life in a better way. And we are also talking about the competition, yes, because we are in the world where everything is tested. But when we talk about whatever NGOs and so on, what we are going back to see the importance of what we are doing is the impact of our people. So I believe that through community foundations, we can make a very big difference. Thank you for everybody who actually tried to share from what I have presented. And thank you. I wish you the best coming year and the Christmas and the total holidays. Bravo.
Asante sana. Thank you so much, Mr. Mwadini, for again, sharing these experiences from a local perspective and the kind of work that has been happening towards the SDGs on the ground in Tanzania. Colleagues, I want to end here and welcome Mr. Evans to give us closing remarks. And from me, I want to wish you well and best times as you celebrate the end of the year, and wish you the very best for 2023. Welcome, Evans.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you so much to our able presenters of the day and to all of us who are in this call. I think what is coming out of this conversation is the need for us to continue strengthening engagement platforms, strengthening the ecosystem of the various actors serving the community philanthropy space so that we can have more of such to enhance our learning, to enhance generation of knowledge, because a lot of wealth of knowledge has been shared in this conversation today. So I think for us as the East Africa Philanthropy Network, we continue to commit to have more of such platforms where we can locally, regionally, and internationally share on our experiences, the trends that we are seeing, the opportunities that communities have in unlocking the resources, or even in meeting the SDGs as we've learned today. So mine is to really say a big thank you and to also inform you that we have an interesting year ahead in not just ending these conversations here, but carrying them forth, developing tools that will enable you to do and enhance your productivity much better in serving the communities. And so big thank you to all of you. Big thank you to Sean. Big thank you to Mwadini and to Dr. Tendai for the huge experience and knowledge that you've shared with us. And to wish all of us a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Looking forward to our continued engagements in 2023. Asanteni sana.
Thank you.